What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back. I'm your host, Ray the Business, and I want to reintroduce you to a new concept I have in the works right now called I Don't Know Shit About Boxing. And the whole point of this is, I've lately, while I haven't been doing my own show, I've been featured on other people's shows. I've been listening to other podcasts, other major podcasts in the boxing scene, as well as the MMA scene, all of that and I hear a lot of people speak, and most of them are very hardcore fans. And people speak, and they have their opinions, and even though their opinions are grounded in sometimes fact, sometimes just theory, these hardcore fans really it just seems like they don't know what they're talking about. And I think it just comes back down to what the late great Roger Mayweather said famously is when he said most people don't know shit about boxing. And I'd like to throw myself in there as well because people say, "Oh, are you betting on the fights tonight?" They assume that I bet because I talk about fighting so much. I watch boxing, I watch the fights, this and that. I don't bet at all. Anytime I do bet, be certain. It's like the Uncle Chael curse. Any of my MMA fans, they know that the person who I bet on, the other person is going to win. So I might as well have my wife bet on the other person double whatever I bet. But if I don't put money on it, usually I'm right. Anyways, the whole point is that people will have these opinions and they'll straight up argue with people, call people names, degrade other people over these opinions that they have, that they just arrogantly have, and they'll die on these hills. And then the person will lose, or they'll just turn out to just be completely wrong. So that being said, let's take it a step back, take it as more of a humble approach to the game, and just realize that most people don't know shit about boxing. Maybe myself, maybe you listening included, but all I can do is offer my opinions and then introduce the floor for debate. If anybody wants to debate my opinions, let me know, comment below, hit me up, we can talk about it and see what ideas we feel are the best. But that being said, there's an idea that's floating around right now in the casual audience. And I hear it all the time. I hear it from reporters, I hear it from all these guys. And it's, why won't Jake Paul fight a real boxer? It's one of those things that if I had a nickel for every time I heard this, right? But it's a legitimate question and a legitimate concern as well, because if you look at this guy's box rec, you know, you don't see any real boxers on there, to be fair. So we're going to go ahead and answer that question. But before we answer that, that's the larger question that we have some sub questions in between. And we'll answer all of those in route to hopefully uncovering our question of why won't Jake fight a real boxer. So I'm hearing the rumors. I'm sure you've heard the rumors as well. And the question is Jake Paul going to be next fighting Anderson Silva? Let me go ahead and pull up my screen right here. Make it a little bit bigger. Per report from Ariel Helwani, I specifically chose Ariel Helwani because he's very good at what he does. Usually he doesn't report on things that are false or premature. So he says, Anderson Silva versus Jake Paul pro boxing match. Discussions are serious and ongoing, but nothing is official right now, sources say. Of course, or else we would have saw some sort of official. DAZN Boxing has been posting a lot, showing that Jake Paul, but they're posting all sorts of stuff. So who knows what, if DAZN Boxing is the legitimate source. Fight would be contested at 185 pounds. That's fair. That's what, Jake Paul's been fighting at 190. So 185 is what Anderson Silva fought at his whole career. 185 pounds, I'm told, developing story. We should know more by the end of the week. And I'm sure the reason why he says developing story is because we just don't have any details. You know what I mean? So take it with a grain of salt. It is what it is. You know what I mean? At the moment, We have this rumor. So we'll go ahead and break that fight down little little bit. But before we do that, let's go into my previous question. You know, why won't Jake Paul fight a real boxer? And to answer this question, I say we take a look at his box rec. So I'll go ahead and pull that up. We have to really look at who he's fought, what this means. So we have Mr. Jake Paul right here. 5 wins, 0 losses, 4 KOs. This is BoxRec. This is like the most official boxing site that you can get. Residence Dorado, Puerto Rico, the problem child, all that stuff. And you see here, really goes back to his first fight. His first fight was Deji, whatever his name is, who just, shout out to him, got his first win in the boxing ring. That was an amateur fight. And then when Eddie Hearn wanted to make the KSI versus Logan Paul rematch, he wanted to do it on a pro show. So Jake Paul made his pro debut against this guy, Ali Asen Gib, I believe his name was. He was another YouTuber. And he started off with a 6-round fight. Obviously, it didn't go past the first, but that's also something that's a bit rare to see somebody start their pro career with a 6-round fight. But people said, it doesn't really count. You know, it was against another YouTuber. Sure, he was training, but that's not a pro fighter. Next fight was on the undercard of Mike Tyson versus Roy Jones Jr., that exhibition fight. And we had a pro contest with a debutante in Nate Robinson. I believe is a Hall of Fame basketball player. I don't know if he's in the Hall of Fame or not, but a really good basketball player. They fought at 189. Nate weighed 181. Again, second round knockout. But this fight I had people, kind of talking because it was something where, Jake Paul, he's not serious. He's fighting Nate. Oh, Nate's from the hood. Nate's an athlete. Boom, knocks him out. And everyone thought, wow, I can't believe he just knocked out Nate Robinson. Then his next fight was against Ben Askren. Now, another boxing debutante. But to be fair, Ben Askren was somebody who has at least had combat experience. But what's very unique about Ben Askren is that his style is reliant on wrestling. As soon as I get close to you, I grab you, I take you to the ground. That was it. He's somebody who, at least other wrestlers, develop a certain, mediocrity when it comes to the striking. Ben didn't really do that. And that was something that we saw exploited when Jorge Masvidal ran straight at him, threw a flying knee, because he knew as soon as he got close, Ben was going to go straight down and try to go for his legs. And Ben never really developed those striking abilities. And then also, this was an out of shape Ben Askren, a retired Ben Askren, and a Ben Askren who had just come off a hip surgery. So you really got the worst version of Ben Askren, as you see here, under 2 minutes. He was TKO'd. And then we had Tyron Woodley. When this fight was announced, I thought, man, this is a bad idea, because people say, oh, well, he's another MMA fighter. I mean, if you look at his MMA career, he has 6 knockouts with the hands. He won the UFC title by knocking out Robbie Lawler with an overhand right, somebody who people were saying had an iron chin, by timing him, which takes mental and fight IQ to do. And we also saw him when he fought Darren Till time the striker with another overhand right and drop him, ultimately submitting him. That's one of those ones where it's almost like a knockout turned into submission. But that being said, Tyron Woodley was coming off of a skid, couple fight layoff. Let's go ahead and check out Tyron Woodley. 0-2. Pretty bad. But anyways, he was coming off of that skid in the UFC. Fought a close decision, split decision, 8 rounds. That's another thing too, man. For Jake Paul to be fighting an 8-round fight in his fourth fight, we'll get to that in a minute. Then he rematches Tyron Woodley in Tampa, Florida in December. I was there, knocked him out cold in the 6th round in his 5th fight. So take it as you will. That is the story of Jake Paul. Up to date, we go into the question of, okay, well, why isn't he fighting a real boxer then? Well, he tried to make the Tommy Fury fight. Nobody really wanted that rematch with Tyron Woodley. It was nice for him to, put a stamp on it so people can't say, oh, well, Tyron Woodley, he won that fight, this and that, even though I don't think he did. I think he turned into the frozen one instead of the chosen one again in that first fight. But not to harp on that fight. He tried to make the Tommy fight. Tommy pulled out. He tried to make the Tommy fight again. There was a lot of controversy with that. Jake was saying, oh, my lawyers have called the embassy. All you have to do is show up. Tommy says he went to the airport, got stopped. Jake says that, you're a celebrity. Your girl's a celebrity. How come nobody took pictures of you at the airport? How come there's no evidence of you at the airport? That's not the questions I want to ask, but I think it is fair to say if we're going to, if we're going to fault Jake for not fighting a real boxer when it comes to that, well, he made the fight with the quote real boxer twice, and what happened there. And I put it in quotes because we'll get to Tommy in a minute. Then he makes a fight with Hasim Rahman Jr. Hasim, people were saying, oh, Jake pulled the plug on that. Jake's promotion pulled the plug on that. But, when it comes down to it, Hasim Rahman was the one who didn't live up to his contractual obligations. I'll put it like that. And I'll touch on that briefly in a minute in there. But, so far as we've seen by Jake Paul's box rec, he's got debut, and then against a guy who's 0-1, who he beat already. So that kind of leads the question, why aren't Jake Paul's fights labeled as exhibitions? I've seen a lot of people. I'll go ahead and add this one in here. Seen a lot of people talk about this, oh, Jake's fighting these exhibition fights. These are exhibition fights. These aren't real pro fights. These are exhibitions. So it brings us into our last question. Why won't Jake fight a real boxer? Well, we kind of have to define what a real boxer is, right? So let's go ahead and take a deeper dive and look into some people, because when we talk about most people don't know shit about boxing, most people don't know the way the early you'll see the top level boxing, the pay-per-views, whatnot, the Floyd Mayweather, all the Manny Pacquiao, all these guys, Canelo, but they don't see the 4-round fights starting off when people, are in, North Carolina or, Mexico, fighting guys in bars and whatnot. They don't see these fights. So I want to go ahead and share the screen. A guy that most people know, a guy named Ryan Garcia. And this is no knock on Ryan Garcia. Don't get it twisted. I'm not trying to say anything positive, negative. I mean, I'll say something positive. I think he's a great fighter, and we'll see what happens in his career. But if we're gonna hold Jake to these standards of, oh, he needs to fight real boxers, this and that, then let's go ahead and take a bigger look at his career. We got 23 wins, 0 losses, 19 wins by knockout. Let's go all the way to the beginning. His first fight, a 4-round fight against a debutante. Second fight, Hector Garcia, 0-2, 0-2-1. 4-round fight, 4-round fight. All 3 of these were first round knockouts. Now in his third fight, he finally fights someone with at least 1 win. And he went the whole distance against a guy with 1 win who was 1-3. at in a 4-round fight, and that's his fourth fight, compared to where Jake fought Tyron Woodley, former UFC champion. And you got to think as well, right? A lot of people want to be like, "Oh, Tyron Woodley's an MMA fighter, he's a wrestler, this and that." You guys think that when you're training to be MMA world champion, especially for as long as Tyron Woodley's been fighting, that you haven't had a boxing coach, like just like a strict coach that's just for boxing? You don't think you've had a boxing coach for at least 10 years, maybe more, maybe 15? You know what I'm saying? So when we take Jake's fourth fight and compare that to Ryan Garcia's fourth fight, do you think Christian Cruz Chasson, who was 1-3, who do you think had more boxing experience in boxing training? Tyron Woodley or this guy? Out of Rancho Grande bar, literally out of a bar in Tijuana, who went 4 rounds while Jake fought double the amount of time, literally fought double the fight. And like I said, this is no knock on Ryan Garcia, but I'm putting things into perspective for us, right? Now we fight somebody with at least 2 wins. Jonathan Cruz, he's got an even record, 2-2. He went to LA for this one at least. Exchange LA, second round knockout. We're still fighting 4-round fights. Nothing wrong with that, guys. This is the way boxing works when it comes to your early fights. For the first like 10 fights, you're fighting people. Some people literally fight drug addicts, cab drivers. You ever heard of the term always fighting a cab driver? They're fighting a can because these guys go in there to get a check. You know, some of these guys are MMA fighters, and at least those guys aren't cab drivers. But I'll touch up on that in the second fighter I want to highlight and showcase. Now we move on to fight number 6, Mario Aguirre, 2-4, 4-round fight. Now we go into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, his 7th fight. We finally fight a guy with at least a winning record who's 8-7, and now we're fighting into a 6-round fight. And we haven't even gotten to an 8-round fight. We don't fight an 8-round fight until 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Until his 11th fight, he hasn't fought an 8-round fight yet. Yet Jake Paul's doing it scheduled really in his 3rd, but went 8 in his 4th. So, anyways, I'm just putting it into perspective a little bit. Now he finally fights guys with winning records coming up. Like I said, not to knock nobody, but that puts things into perspective. But maybe you say, okay, well, that's just Ryan Garcia. Well, let's look at somebody who's been very outspoken about Jake, calling him a clown show, calling what he does not real boxing. It's bad for boxing. Let's take a look at Jovante Davis. And I know some people like to say, "Oh, you hate on Jovante Davis, this and that." We'll get into that on another thing. I really like Jovante. I think he has a lot of talent. A lot of talent. I don't feel like it's being showcased effectively against I mean, it is being showcased effectively, but he's not fighting the top talent in his division while he has a stacked division, and it's frustrating for the fans. That being said, let's go down. Jake Paul called this out quite well. So his first fight against the guy Desi Williams, 0-4 at the DC Armory. Then he fights a debut, fights a guy who's 4-7, 1-1, 2-8, 3-9. Until our 9th fight, we don't fight a guy who's at least has a winning record. Now this guy was 47-31, which is actually quite a record. That's a lot of fights. And then Tank went the full 6 rounds. But see, Tank hasn't even fought 8 rounds. He doesn't even get scheduled an 8-round fight until, again, the 11th fight. So that just goes to show not only is Jake fighting way tougher opposition to begin with, but fighting a longer fights. We look at Jake or Jovante 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Javante's 8th fight is a guy named Hector Lopez. And the reason I bring this up is because people were saying, "Oh, why is Jake fighting MMA fighters?" well, Jake shouldn't be fighting MMA fighters. I mentioned earlier that some of these guys, these lower level guys that people fight when they first start off, some of them are, cab drivers, just can crushers, to be crushed, check collectors, but some of them are MMA fighters that say, "Hey, you know what? If I can go take a boxing fight, work on some of my stand up a little bit, sure I'll lose, but it's a way for me to get a check and actually make some money while I'm trying to pursue this MMA career. I don't really care what my boxing record looks like. Let me go do that." That happens all the time. So we look at this guy that I just brought up a minute ago, and let's see. Here we go. This is the same guy, Hector Lopez, who Jovante Davis fought in his 8th fight. This guy at the same time, where's his pro record? MMA fight record, pro results. Is this pro record? Pro MMA record. Let me see the pro results. Why does it say 47? This can't be right. He fought Sean O'Malley. He didn't fight no Sean O'Malley. Okay. Here we go. At the time that he fought Jovante Davis, he was 3-0. So let me ask you, the listener, the casual fan, why is it okay for Jovante Davis to fight in his 8th fight an MMA fighter who is debuting at 3-0, but for Jake Paul in his 4th fight to not fight not only an MMA fighter but a UFC future Hall of Famer 5-time world champion? And the same man is going to call that bad for boxing. This is a clown show. This is that, whatever he said. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he was very outspoken negatively about it. So that's just me bringing this up. Why is that? What is the difference? You know what I'm saying? We look at Tyron Woodley's record, because that's another thing too. We look at let's talk about the real boxer again. You know what I'm saying? So we talked about Ryan Garcia. We talked about Jovante Davis. Well, Jake was gonna fight a real boxer. He was gonna fight a real boxer in Tommy Fury. Tommy Fury's a real boxer, right? So that begs the question: what is a real boxer? Tommy Fury's 8-0. Look at his record. His first fight, he fought a guy who is 10 wins, 102 losses. All of these. Look at this. Let's look at this a little bit further. When was the last time this guy won? Last time this guy won was 2015. Before that, it was 2014. So this guy hasn't won a fight in 7 years and has just lost, 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 lost. This guy is a pro loser. No offense to this guy. The sport, this is good for people like this guy. But if Jake fought this guy, people would be clowning on him. Oh, he fought a guy who's 10 and 102. What? That's crazy. Then for his second fight, he fights a guy who's 0 and 26. Imagine if Jake Paul fought a guy like that. Imagine. Or 2 and 26. Imagine what people would say on Sports Center. 0 and 11. Imagine. 0 and 9. Imagine. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Tommy Fury's 5-0 fighting career losers. No offense to Tommy Fury. If I were him and I didn't have an extensive background like he did, I couldn't say I wouldn't do the same thing. But if we're going to, let me make this bigger so everyone can see. If we're going to put this whatever we want to call it, I can't even speak. this criticism on Jake just because we don't like him. Is that fair? And then he fights a guy, Jordan Grant, who's 2-0. Then he fights an 0-1. But who was this guy? This was on the undercard last year of the first Tyron Woodley Jake Paul fight. A guy named Anthony Taylor, who was a sparring partner for Jake Paul. The guy was an MMA fighter who was 0-1. So Tommy Fury was able to fight on that same card on the undercard against an MMA fighter with an 0-1 record who nobody knows who Anthony Taylor is. No offense to Anthony Taylor. He's not a UFC future Hall of Famer. He's not a UFC 5-time world champion. Anthony Taylor later went on to win 2 fights. So now he's an MMA fighter who can actually win boxing fights. You put him against a guy who actually had a winning record too, but then he ends up losing against who's Chris Avila? Chris Avila is an MMA fighter who boxed. This guy is boys with Nate Diaz. You know what I'm saying? So when you look at the bigger picture here, for one, when we're in the lower level boxing and you're fighting an MMA fighter, it's fair game. And then he finally fights a guy who's 10-1. He ends up beating him in a 6-round fight. So Tommy hasn't even fought 8 rounds before. You know what I'm saying? And no offense to this guy, but he never fought outside of Poland, I believe. Look at this. Poland, boom, fought at Wembley against Tommy. And what is this? Poland. I think that's Poland. Excuse me if I'm wrong. And he had lost the previous fight. So it looked like a little bit of hand picking, but that's the way boxing is. Fair play to him. Anyways, my rant concludes on that. Why are Jake Paul's fights not labeled as exhibitions? Because then why aren't any of these other guys labeled as exhibitions? You know what I'm saying? If you go and train, what's the difference between him fighting Ben Askren and freaking, Devin Haney fighting a guy in a bar in Tijuana? Do we know if that guy's been training? Do we know that guy's a legit boxer? You put it on his box rec, right? No offense to Devin Haney, but it just is what it is. You know what I'm saying? Lastly, on this point, because I got some other points to make. I'm going way too long on this, but it's all good. We look at Tyron Woodley. His last skid right here was very bad. Loss, and then he lost twice in boxing. Last time by devastating knockout. Terrible. Couldn't believe it. Saw it with my eyes. But anyways, we see this. Like I said, Darren Till, he submitted him, but he essentially knocked him out before he did that, and he timed him perfectly. Stephen Thompson, and I think it was in the draw, had him basically knocked out cold. And this guy is like a karate world champion. This guy is so good at striking. And he had this guy basically dead. If that was a boxing fight, bro, the ref would have waved it. Robbie Lawler, guy who was this iron chin dude, KO'd in the first round. You know what I'm saying? And this ain't that long ago. 2016, 2018. 3 years later, he's getting KO'd by freaking Jake Paul. And we're going to say that's not legit? I don't know, man. I just have questions. That's it. That's all I'm saying. But, Jake Paul was going to fight a real boxer. He was going to fight a real boxer. If Tommy Fury wasn't a real boxer, then Hasim Rahman Jr. was. You know what I mean? I'm not going to go as far as to pull up his box rec and whatnot. Or, you know what? Maybe I will. So anyways, this guy, Hasim Rahman Jr., was supposed to fight Jake Paul, and the fight fell out. So let's just cover really quickly, why did Paul versus Rahman Jr. fall out? Why did this fight fall apart? We've heard things back and forth, whether it was Jake Paul. Ultimately, Jake Paul's promotion pulled the plug on the whole thing. Really, they could have fought. And then people want to give Jake Paul shit about it, but I'll leave you to decide. So he was 12-1. His last fight, he fought the son of Tommy Morrison, aka Tommy Gunn from Rocky 5. He was TKO'd in the 5th round. But before that, let's go ahead and take a look at his pro record. Debutant, debutant, and then you fight a guy who's a debut and you knock him out with 40 seconds into the first round. That makes you think, how much was this guy training? Who was this guy? Who was Ralph Alexander? Maybe he's legit. Maybe he's not. Do we call that an exhibition? Do we call Demetrius Shaw an exhibition? No. James Jones, 4-11. Excuse me. 3-10, 4-15. Now we have a winning record, 26-21. Still 6-round fights, 4-round fight, 4-round fight, 4-round fight, 6, 6, 6. Wow. So this guy hasn't even ever fought an 8th round. He's never been to a 7th round. And this guy's the legit boxer. You know what I'm saying? So I know it sounds like I'm being negative. I know it sounds like I'm being a hater. It's just one of those things when there's so much hate for a guy like Jake Paul. I just feel like it's misinformed, it's misdirected. This guy is actually making some moves in the sport, I feel. And ultimately what happened was, here was the issue. We got to go to the weights, right? So we look at 234, 233. This is what Hakeem Rahman Jr. weighed at every one of these fights. 232, 226. With this fight, he was 269 for this fight. Now, basically what happened was he told Jake Paul's team he could make the fight happen and he would be able to weigh in at the weight of 200 pounds. He said it was fine. He went on this whole press tour, went on everybody's podcast, talking about, oh, the weight's fine, weight's good, weight's good. Week out from the fight, he was supposed to be checked on by New York State Athletic Commission, which really a lot of people said they shouldn't have done that anyways. But I think the New York State Athletic Commission, because there was a rehydration clause in there as well, wanted to make sure that everything was going smoothly. And the rehydration clause is essentially he would have to weigh in 200 on the night, and then, or on the weigh in, he would have to weigh 200 pounds. The next night before the fight, he would have to weigh in, whether it was the day of, I don't know what time exactly, but he couldn't rehydrate to more than 210 pounds. That way, he's not just sucking out a bunch of weight and then rehydrating up to like 230, something like that, something crazy, right? And really what it is that Jake's team wanted him to be more drained, so that makes it more of a fair fight. I mean, you have a guy who's been boxing his whole life at heavyweight, has 12 wins. This is a fight that somebody who's, 4-0 against the record that Jake's had shouldn't be taking. Yet here he is taking it. Nobody else is box rec that we've covered has taken a fight like this. Yet here we are. And it's up for Hakeem Rahman Jr.'s team to follow through. They're the ones who accepted the terms. So essentially, they come back and they said, hey, you know what? We're actually not going to be able to make 200 pounds. So Jake's team said, you know what? This is what we'll do. We'll fight at 205. They sent a new contract. We'll fight at 205. They didn't even have to do that. They could have just said, you know what? Too bad you said you were going to do this. Jake said, nah, you know what? We'll make the fight 205. There you go. 5 pounds. That's a lot of weight. If you're not going to make, for example, they stripped Charles Oliveira of his title over half a pound. So they gave him 5 pounds and they didn't even sign the new contract. They didn't have to give him a new contract. They did. They didn't sign it. They said, nah, we can't make that either. The day of the fight, we're going to weigh 215. Or at weigh-ins, we're going to weigh 215. What are you talking about? That's 5 pounds heavier than the rehydration clause. And now we're going to say that Jake Paul is the bad guy in this? Bro, any other legal contract that you're in, I'm in real estate. You have terms. If you don't stick to those terms, you lose your escrow deposit, you get sued, all sorts of things. Any other sort of contract, you sign the contract. You're a grown man. So I'm sorry. It just is what it is. It's no offense to Hakeem Rahman Jr. because now he's built a name off of this. Now he's able, to be able to get this fight with Vitor Belfort in a DAZN headliner. Had he never done this, that wouldn't have happened. So maybe that was the plan all along. But yeah, he wasn't able to do it. MVP, most valuable promotions, pulled the plug. It is what it is. So that's why that one fell out. But we go back to, is Jake Paul fighting Anderson Silva, right? Now Jake Paul has not fought since December. Jake Paul hasn't fought since December, I should say. And his opponent for August pulled out. His other opponent, contractually did not meet obligations. So you are default. You have defaulted on your agreed upon terms of the contract. And now it looks like he's going to fight somebody who we know is going to show up in Anderson Silva. But here we go again. This isn't a real boxer, right? Can Anderson Silva even box? Anderson Silva isn't a boxer. So let's take a better look at it. Look a little bit further. Just a second. Yeah, can Anderson Silva even box? You know what I'm saying? First, let's take a look at this. We'll go a little bit bigger right here. Anderson Silva went on let's cut all of this out, right? Legendary UFC run. He made his UFC debut against Chris Lieben for the UFC middleweight title eliminator and knocked him out. That fight was crazy. Then his second fight wins the UFC middleweight championship, and then just defense after defense. A couple fights at light heavyweight. Fights Chris Weidman, clowned around, got knocked out. Fights Chris Weidman again, breaks his leg. Has a non-title fight against Nick Diaz. He won, but popped for PEDs. That fight was overturned to a no contest. Then he came back, lost against Michael Bisping. He lost against Daniel Cormier. To be fair, he took that fight on 3 days' notice. Comes back, fights Derek Brunson, gets a decision win. Then he's off for 2 years. I don't remember exactly why. And basically fights a title eliminator with Israel Adesanya. People were saying, hey, off of one win, Anderson Silva, like he's finally back against Brunson. If he wins this fight against Adesanya, who was looking like that guy, then, we could see him getting another title shot. He was getting older at this point. Now, I think at this point he was like, 43, something like that. But he lost that fight. He lost the Cannoneer via leg kick TKO. And then he lost to Uriah Hall on Halloween of 2020. And then was ultimately cut from the UFC. So in his last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 fights, he won 2 of them. One of them was overturned to a no contest. So really, he was 1-7 with 1 no contest out of his last 9 fights in the UFC. Not really the best, but Anderson Silva went back to boxing. If we look here, he had a boxing record. He had a pro boxing fight. Oh, hold on. I'm not even at the right thing. Whoops. Amateur hour, bro. So we go back to the question, can Anderson Silva box? Right? He had a terrible ending to his UFC career. He's an old guy now. Can this guy even box, man? Well, we see that he had a boxing fight here, 1998, which he lost in the first round. And then it looks like it was stopped in the corner. So he lost that. He fought a guy who was 8-2. Maybe that was one of those situations where he was fighting to get a check. Like I said, like an MMA guy fighting to get a check against the guy who was on the come up. against a guy who's 8-2 with this, pretty okay winning record. Then in 2005, with a record of 0-1, he fights a debutant, Julio Cesar de Jesus, wins that with a second round TKO. So he fights in 98. Then he fights in 2005. And then his third fight is in 2021. He fights in Guadalajara against former middleweight champion with a record of 52-5, Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., the son of the legend Julio Cesar Chavez. And that was a fight where people were like, what is this guy doing? He's fighting Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. And that, my friends, is where I want to go into a little bit of a screen share, because if you miss this fight, this is where we really get into can Anderson Silva box. So let's go ahead and share the screen on this one.
Going to be a smart idea in boxing.
Oh, nice. Bringing the action, being aggressive, starting everything.
Anderson Silva.
Yeah, Anderson just needs
Boom.
to be careful.
Look at the way he's moving. This guy is like 45 years old, 44 years old at this point. I think 45.
He's really
this is a year and a half ago.
I mean, he's been under the
not even
many times.
Boom, look at that slip.
Not being overwhelmed or
look at the head movement, the way he's slipping in and out.
Something that I love. And I feel like
when people talk about, and here's the thing, people are going to say,
look at Chavez.
Let me go ahead and pause this. I'll tell you right now what the narrative is going to be going into this. Here's Jake Paul fighting another old guy. Here's Jake Paul fighting another MMA fighter. He's just fighting another MMA fighter. Bro, does this look like another MMA fighter to you? Look at the way this guy is moving. Look at what he's doing against a former world champion. We'll go ahead and play it.
Razor sharp. He's looking for that aggression and just going with those hooks.
Oh, big right hand there. Chavez got
slips.
Silva. Oh, Silva says, come on. Let's go.
Showboating.
What do you got?
This fight's going to be good.
Give it to me, Chavez.
Look at that.
What do you got?
Chavez is scared because he knows the counters are coming.
Oh, good body shot.
But that's how he lulls guys into counter shots.
Exactly.
He's playing mind games. He's being a bully, a tough guy.
Boom.
Good uppercut.
Yes.
He's getting under the skin of Chavez.
What is up with that step?
Look at that. Doing some stuff people never seen.
Yes.
He's feeling completely comfortable in there.
Look at that. Smothering with the
boxing
head.
Rhythm his whole life, and you got to
The rhythm is there.
He's doing
He is a boxer in this fight. He's not an MMA guy. Look at that. Fighting on the inside.
Either. He's taking the punches well.
Very well. Even that hook to the liver, no problem.
I mean, he is a bigger man.
Jab to the body.
To block that shot. He's doing it very well.
Joking me. Look at that. Boom. 1-1-2.
Coming in big time in this round, guys.
Even use a little half plum
Silva really
to hit him
starting
with.
to feel himself in that last round.
Silva fighting on the inside, in and out.
Continuing on with that pressure. Instead of Julio pressuring Silva, it's Silva.
That's it. This is his backyard.
Boom.
And then he was more looking to
throwing uppercuts, shifting.
Yes.
Oh, nice right hand lands, but
took it well.
He won't even budge.
If I were to have told you, watching this fight,
why would you complain?
And you didn't know who these guys were. Look at that combination.
No, not at all,
slipping through the guard. If I were to told you, hey, one of these guys is a former boxing world champion and one of them is an MMA guy.
Every 100 that Silva throws.
If you were a casual fan, you would think, oh, the Chavez Jr. guy, that's the MMA guy. Silva looks like a real boxer here. Look at that.
He's going to take it. Yes.
On the inside.
That's been the most surprising.
He chooses to be there.
And they even tried to rob him, too, because he was fighting on his dad's undercard in Mexico. And he fought so well that they couldn't even rob him.
Almost saw another controversial decision there. You should have seen the way we looked at each other.
Split decision that was not a split decision. Everybody knows Anderson Silva won that fight, and he did it easily. When I was watching that, I was like, Anderson's beating him. Anderson's whooping him. I couldn't believe it. Right? But, that just goes to show that Anderson Silva can box. Now, if we want to see technically two MMA fighters fighting each other, right? And we can't even say we go back to Anderson Silva's box rec, right? Let's look at that real quick. So he's 3-1. His one loss was in his debut. A win in 2005, a win in 2021 in June against a former world champion. Let me stress that a little bit more. And then now another debut against a former MMA fighter who Tito Ortiz, 47. Okay, so a guy the same age as him. So we can't even be like, oh, he's old, this and that. The guy's the same age, right? Now, let's go ahead and look at that. This was Anderson Silva's, hold on a second, Anderson Silva's last fight.
Ever fight 2-minute rounds?
Yeah, I did actually. And as an amateur.
They had to do 2-minute rounds for Ortiz. And then look at this. Boom.
In 2 minutes.
And what did you think about it? You prefer the 2-minute rounds as Tito Ortiz closes in on the corner?
Ortiz thinks he's doing something.
He's swinging and missing, but he caught him in a straight right there.
Listen.
Ortiz thinks he's doing, I'm going to rewind this a little bit. He thinks he's doing something. Anderson Silva goes into the back, into the corner, kind of baits him in. Like he did in the Chavez fight. You saw that. He's baiting him in. He's throwing up the defense. Video is very blurry. Bear with me.
2-minute rounds.
Throwing up the defense, catching. Tito's not really throwing with anything too heavy.
Not a lot of these punches landed.
Boom. Anderson throws up an uppercut. He's trying to catch and shoot.
Swinging and missing.
Tito's able to land a right hand off of that missed catch.
But he caught him in a straight right there.
Listen,
And then
I like the 2 minutes.
Tito throws like 5 hooks in a row.
I like the 2 minutes because of this.
Boom. And then Anderson.
I like the 2 minutes
Watch.
because of
Boom.
this.
Boom, boom. Tito's out cold. Cold.
Whoa! Can you believe this?
So within 90 seconds, Tito Ortiz is out cold. So anyways, does that answer the question? Can Tito Ortiz actually box? I mean, can Tito Ortiz actually box? That answered the question too. No, he can't. That was an MMA guy versus a boxer. A boxer who in his last fight beat a former world champion. The son of a legend. A guy who's fought his entire life since he was in the womb. Do you get what I'm saying now? Have I stressed this enough? So, that being said, final thoughts. Look, we talked about, can Jake Paul, why isn't Jake Paul fighting real boxers? Why is he fighting Anderson Silva next? Why did the Rahman fight fall out? Can Anderson Silva actually box? Is this a legit fight? Just to sum up everything, compared to everybody else, Jake Paul in his career, just with the Tyron Woodley fights alone, in his 4th and 5th fight, has fought much better competition and for longer durations of fight, more advanced through the career than most current world champions at the same moment in their career. If that answers that. Anderson Silva as the next fight does make sense because people have talked about him fighting Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. And it just makes you think, why would he fight Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. when Anderson Silva just beat him? And what's so silly, I believe, is that you're going to hear these pundits and all these people. Had he fought Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., people would go, wow, Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., former world champion. This is such a big step up for Jake Paul. Now he's going to fight the guy who just beat Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. And people are going to go, wow, he's fighting another MMA fighter. He's fighting an old guy, this and that. The narratives are just going to flow out. But it's fine. I feel like this fight is going to be good. And listen, I'm not sitting here like, oh, I'm Jake Paul's biggest fan. It feels like I sound like Jake Paul's biggest fan in this podcast. But people need to understand what actually is the reality here. People, I feel like they're giving this guy not a fair shake in any of this. But at the end of the day, I don't know shit about boxing. Most people don't know shit about boxing. What do you think? Do you think I'm wrong? Do you think I'm right? Do you think I have a point? I guess we'll see. Till next time.